Hi everyone, welcome back to the Rip the Plaster podcast. I'm Alex and I'm on a journey to build my own business, a language learning app. And this podcast is all about doing the hard things, ripping the plaster off so that we can all achieve our dreams. So, with that, today I want to talk to you about MVPs because in the business and entrepreneurship world, I think this might be the biggest buzzword out there. But I think that the meaning has got lost a little bit in translation along the way. So today I want to talk about what even is a real MVP and how do we know we have an MVP? How can we define it for ourselves and how can we make sure that we are actually working towards an MVP and not just keep changing the goalposts? So, firstly, as this is my accountability space, I want to check in with my moment of ripping off the plaster for the week. This week, I have focused on getting my 9 to 5 tasks done within my 9 to 5 time slots because, as a chaotic person, my brain allows itself to think that we have time on the weekend. And so many times I've worked on the weekend. And so I haven't felt that pressure to finish my tasks. And this week I really wanted to just give myself some thinking spaces, give myself some breathing space so that I can actually focus on my own business and be creative with that because when you have other things in your mind, it's very hard. So that is what I did this week, and I'm very happy to say that it actually did work. I'm obsessed with breathing meditations to help me learn to focus. So I honestly would recommend that too in the morning to start your day. But I'm very happy to say that that has actually worked. So please tell me what your ripping the plaster moment of the week is in the comments. And with that, let's move on to the topic of the day. MVP. So what does MVP even stand for? So this is minimum viable product, which I think is quite well known in this space by now. And that just means what is the most basic version that you can build to test out your product. And what does that mean? So, this term was originally, I believe, came from the Bible, which is the lean startup. If you haven't read this, even if you think you've listened to a podcast about it, even if you think you know the terms, I just think you should read it because I just think it is so useful to come back to. I've been referring back to it this weekend because it's just got so many little golden nuggets, just pure gold. Anyway, and so it was first designed by that author, Eric Ries, and it basically is the concept that you want to minimize the amount of building the wrong thing that your company does. Like, it's very easy to make a plan and say, yeah, we want to build this, this, and that, and then you build the whole thing, and a year down the line, you find out actually your customers have no interest in that, and actually they would rather this other thing. So the whole point is trying to minimize the time that you get to that learning phase. So he has a phrase called the build, measure, and learn framework. And the build aspect of it is basically building an MVP. And a minimum viable product is the most basic way of testing your assumptions. So your assumptions are my customers want this. So, for example, with my own, I'm currently going through and I'm thinking what my assumptions are. I think there's two things that my value of my product is, and that is one, that I think other platforms don't teach you the relevant words that you need when you actually first get to a new country. Duolingo being a prime example of this. And then the other thing is that I think that no one also has taught us how to learn, and I think that's one of the biggest value point. I have realized that actually people don't necessarily know that they don't know how to learn. Like, if you think of the Duolingo example, there are people that have been doing streaks for a year or more, but they actually don't remember too much of the vocabulary. Like, they don't feel confident enough to use it in real life. I think that it takes absolutely ages and boredom to get to remembering the word, essentially. And I just think that there's better ways to learn. And I also think that no one knows how to learn. So I'm trying to encapsulate that. But that was an assumption that I thought that everyone knew how bad Duolingo is to learn. And actually, it was only when I was asking one of my test users about it, and they said, "Oh, I like how on Duolingo it lets you click on the suggested answer. Like it gives you options of which to choose." And I said, "Yeah, but if you do that, that means it is not very helpful for learning. It means that you don't actually process it." And then it kind of clicked that, oh yeah. And then she realized that she has been doing Duolingo for a very long time and doesn't really feel capable in speaking confidently or using that language confidently. And so I think that's an example of a learning that comes from your MVP. Your MVP is testing your assumptions of your business. So an MVP doesn't actually have to be a product. And this is actually the biggest takeaway for today. That an MVP does not have to be a product. It is an experiment. It is the first way, the easiest and cheapest way that you can think of to test if that assumption about your business is true. There's always the classic story of how when the food service app, I believe it's in America, I'm not going to remember the name. No, there was a food delivery service in America and they wanted to see if people were interested in buying this service, which obviously we now know is something so important to our life. Like we can't imagine life without Uber Eats, Deliveroo, Global here in Spain. But at that time, it wasn't available. So they wanted to test that assumption. And so what they did is they just offered the phone number or the website and then saw if anyone had a click. Instead of having drivers and everyone already made up in a business they didn't know if it would work, the actual CEOs were the one that went and placed the order manually of what their customers wanted and then went and collected it and then delivered it. And they basically did that whole version of their business in a very much manual way, but then you can see if people actually do want your service. And that's an MVP. So nowadays, I think that an MVP is possibly the most important thing, especially in the era of AI, because it depends what you're aiming to do with AI and all these easy to prototype tools. Like, if you're planning on making a quick buck, then I think that all the tools out there are fine. But I think if you're looking to make a valuable product that people actually want to continue using, then I think it is important to get to know your users and it is important to get to know their values and their actual problems. And that's the bit that often gets ignored with the design process with AI because everyone is so excited to say, oh my God, look what I can build. And it's also really easy to prototype things now, like so much faster than even just 2 years ago before these tools are readily available. And so now I think the question is really, when do we stop building features and when do we show it to users? And I think that the answer to that comes from understanding your users' pain points and what you want them to do. So I would recommend two books actually. Obviously, I've already spoken about The Lean Startup, but there's another one called Hooked, and it's about creating a habit loop for your product. But it also talks about understanding the pain points of your users and how to cater for that. But I think that your MVP should be something that directly tests if the habit loop works or if it solves the assumption that you think it's solving. The lean startup actually divides assumptions into two key categories. So the first one is the value hypothesis, and the second one is the growth hypothesis. And your MVP should try and test both of these. You should have some way of measuring if these are what you think they are, because the key thing that he tries to explain is that if you don't measure what you think will happen, then anything is just fine and anything is acceptable, but actually you're not really learning if what you think is true is true. So, value hypothesis is basically whether once a customer is using your product, does it deliver the real value that you hope for? And this, I think, can be one of the hardest ones to think of for your own business. So, the first rule of thumb is don't use a survey because people just do not reply with real answers. They don't know what they do. There's a big difference between what they do and what they think, and we want to know what they do. So, don't use surveys. The biggest way of measuring this is retention rate, which is quite common, but this is where it comes from, is you want to know if people are coming back and what is the frequency that you think that they need to come back. This will vary for many different things. Like if it's something, well, just to use real products, like if it's a food service, it doesn't need to be every day for it to still be valuable, But if it's like email, then it kind of does need to be every day and very often every day. So that's why it's very hard to kind of come up with a measurement for this. But I think you should think about what is your value, what is the problem that you're trying to solve, and then how can I measure that? So, one of my values is that people actually learn efficiently and people actually learn words and can remember words much better than on other platforms. So, one of my value hypotheses is going to be measuring after how long did people forget or do they continuously remember? How well did they actually learn a word and keep track of that? Because that's one of the important hypotheses for my business. And that's one of the things that I would like to use in marketing to explain why it's different to other competitors. The other one is the growth hypothesis. So, this is how your business can grow. So, if you think that your business is going to grow via word of mouth, then having a way of measuring that and actually following, say, for example, when you use first group of people to test out your service, your very, very big MVP, very, very starter MVP, I should say, then after a while you have to track, did they actually tell it to anyone? Maybe when you have an individual code or something like that, so that you can track whether they've actually clicked the share button. These are kind of ways that you can track if that actually did happen compared to if someone just says that it does or says that they want to do that. Because again, these two things are very, very different. And then from this, when you want to test this in the beginning, the Lean Startup talks about a concierge version of minimum viable product. So this is basically giving your first customers the best possible experience that you cannot replicate to everyone. But because they are the first ones, the best possible experience, like personalized, whatever they want from your business, like you give it to them. This is where you can understand which bits they actually want to use and where is the value actually coming from. And many times you'll find that it's actually not where you think it comes from. But that's the point, right? Is that you are trying to work out what it is for people and then zoom in on that. And that's how you save a lot of wasted time. So for me, I have decided to talk about this topic today because I have been in a rut of just moving the goalposts for so long. And I know about the MVP, and I did a first basic version of the MVP and I showed it to a few family and friends to figure out bugs and their first impressions. It was good actually to get that feedback. It was very, very helpful actually. And then from there, I implemented some of their feedback, but it's not everything because you have to decide for yourself. My next version of it is something that I do want to release to a bit more of a wider audience. I've been struggling to kind of finish it and I've put my foot down on a few different features, but there always seems to be more. And that's why this time I've decided this weekend, I've spent the weekend rereading Hooked and the Lean Startup to come up with my polished version. I've come up with the features that align with my value, which is them being able to learn properly, learning how and having fun with that, and my overall value in that respect, and also giving them structure. They say they want to learn Spanish, but they don't know where to start. And so structuring that with the relevant words for touching down in Spain, as well as making sure that it does have the capability to teach you if you use it, that is what I'm starting out with. And now this week I'm going to finalize the metrics, like how I'm going to track and make sure that I know if it's working. And this is my accountability to myself to make sure that I actually finish this in a week, because by next week I want to just send it out because I need some real feedback and I need some more people from my actual target audience trying it. So that is my accountability moment of the week, and I hope that this has been helpful or can at least give you some room for thought about your own MVP. Are you testing your value? Do you know what your value is? And are you measuring that good? Are you measuring what people say, or are you measuring what they actually do? And if things don't go to what you think they should be, then that's fine. It's just that you need to pivot a little bit to actually go where the value is, because there will be some. That's all for today. I will see you next week. Bye.